Okay, I'm in the home of Lee Robinson, and I'm going to ask him to share some experiences that he had during the Second World War. And I'm trying to record the experiences of those who were eyewitnesses to that war. And so I'm going to start by asking him what he remembers, what he was doing on December 7th, 1941.
I've recorded this in my history, Steve, so I have a paragraph here that pretty well explains what I was doing. December 7, 1941 was a day which, like a bolt out of the blue, altered the plans of most young men of the time, and I was no exception. A friend and I had been out skiing and were driving toward home when we heard the news on the radio that the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor. The significance of that fateful act of violence on the part of the Japanese was not immediately clear to me, but it was upsetting enough that by the time September 1942 rolled around and I should have been enrolling in college, aided by a small Union Pacific scholarship, I found myself unable to make the decision to enter college. The time for registration came and went, and I was still drifting in a sea of indecision. Then one day, as I walked down the street in Pocatello, Idaho, a fellow in a blue uniform with a white military cap stuck his head out the window of the second-story window of the post office building and shouted, "Semper Fidelis." I thought he said $75, so I rushed in, grabbed the pen from his hand, and signed on the dotted line. The stark reality of the situation came to me as he shook my hand most enthusiastically and said, "Welcome to the United States Marine Corps, Mac." And that's what I was doing on December 7, 1941. It was a shock to everybody that the Japanese would have the audacity to do that, because they had sent emissary to Washington, D.C. and had given no indication that there was about to be an attack on the United States. It was a bad thing that the Japanese did. It was terrible. And there were some, I think around 3,000 people who lost their lives at Pearl Harbor because of that attack. Well, I did join the Marine Corps in the fall of 1942. I had graduated from high school in May of 1942. Spent the summer in Coeur d'Alene working for the Forest Service. Came back in the fall, and in October I enlisted in the Marine Corps. A great decision, but a good decision for me. I like the idea of the military and the Marine Corps. It was looking for a few good men. And I wanted to be one of those good men. And I think, after it was all said and done, I was a good man. I was good for the Marine Corps, and the Marine Corps was good for me. It was a great experience. A lot of bad things happened, but I met a lot of good guys, good friends, and learned discipline like I would never learn it anywhere else. So the Marine Corps was good for me and to me. I went to San Diego that winter and entered boot camp I was still 18 when I entered boot camp, turned 19 when I was in boot camp, and went through that very rigorous training. Learned a lot about the Marine Corps, about rifles, about military drill and parade grounds and all of the stuff that goes on. Learned how mean a drill sergeant can be. Learned how you had to be there at the right time and the right dress with the right preparation. And that was good. The boot camp lasted about 6 weeks. After boot camp, we had a selection of things which we could do. One of them was parachute school. And I thought, now, that sounds like fun. So I signed up for parachute school and went to Camp Gillespie, which was only a few miles from San Diego. There we went into very rigorous training, physical training. We learned how to pack a parachute and how to jump off of a 12-foot, this is an 8-foot ceiling, 12 feet is 4 feet beyond that. We had to jump off that without spraining an ankle or breaking a leg. and they had 250-foot towers, which were designed to give us an experience of jumping with a parachute up that 250-foot tower with a cable, and you pulled a ripcord and down you came 27 feet, then snapped, then you stopped in midair. It was a thrill, but a good experience. Then from that same tower, they would pull up a parachute, and you'd pull the cord, or they would pull the cord, and then you'd drift down in a parachute and learn to tumble so you didn't get hurt. Anyway, we made the appropriate number of jumps and qualified as a Marine paratrooper. I was sent overseas as a replacement into a Marine Corps battalion, which was located in New Caledonia. Shortly after that, we were sent to Guadalcanal. The combat in Guadalcanal was not complete. There was still a little bombing and a few patrols, but most of the really severe fighting was done by the time I got there. And shortly after that, the island was declared secure, and that was as far as we went in the Solomon Islands. Guadalcanal is the most southerly island in the Solomon Group, and it was there that the United States tactically went up the Solomons to establish its domination of those islands. The Japanese had invaded the whole string of islands, and the natives there were very cooperative with the United States, because the Japanese, they were not very nice people. They were not very nice people, and the natives knew that. So after Guadalcanal, we went back to Hawaii and started training there for more landings. We thought we might get a chance to use our parachutes training, but the jungles which existed in the Solomon Islands precluded any real parachute invasion. So we swallowed our pride one day after the training and went on rubber boats onto the island of Choiseul. That was the island just south of Bougainville. Our assignment was to make our presence known to the Japanese so they would think it was a major invasion of that island. There was only one regiment, 3 battalions of Marines on the whole island, but we spread ourselves out and made contact with the enemy everywhere we could to simulate a major invasion of that island. The result was the Japanese drew troops from Bougainville, which was America's major objective. The troops were drawn to the island of Choiseul. Then they were cut off by the naval blockade, which the United States was then superior to the Japanese. Well, that was my first real taste of combat. My platoon was to meet at a certain point. We were to go to a certain river. We were to contact the enemy if we could. If we couldn't, we were supposed to come back to a rendezvous point and be picked up the next morning by an LCI, a landing craft. Just one squad of us, 10 men. And we didn't meet the enemy, so we came back down, and the first thing we knew, we were right in the middle of a Japanese bivouac. There were Japanese all around us. They weren't aware that we were there, but we knew they were. So we hid as best we could. Too late to go back because the more movement we made, the more apt we were to be discovered. The next morning, a boy who had been a Boy Scout, one of our men, not a boy, a man, had been a Boy Scout and he knew semaphore. So he crawled out on the beach, got behind a rock, and with his semaphore signaled to the boat that was supposed to pick us up. The boats, the fellow who was operating the boat saw the campfires, the smoke from the campfires of the Japanese. They were getting their breakfast. So he was a little reluctant to come in. But once he got the message, bless his heart, he came roaring in. We ran out across the beach and into the water and jumped into that LCI and headed back out to sea.
So let me interrupt you for just a second.
All right.
So the rumor is true that your existence, and thus the existence of my wife Christine, is due because of the Boy Scouts of America.
You could say that,
Okay.
Steve. I pay my respect to that guy, that he knew enough of what he had learned in scouting, that he was able to communicate with the person who was manning that boat. You're right. In my history, I say, so I owe my life, probably my life, to the training of a Boy Scout. It was great. Anyway, we got on the boat and headed out to sea, and there were 10 of us, and we all loaded our rifles and just peppered into that bivouac area, just round after round after round. I don't know if we hit anybody or not. I'm sure they ducked for cover as soon as we started shooting, and they never shot back. So that was my first experience with facing the enemy. And it was a good experience because all 10 of us survived. And it could have been disaster had not that Boy Scout existed, and that man who operated that LCI faced the music and came in after us. He was pretty brave to do that. Yeah. Well then, let's see, that was Choiseul. Bougainville was invaded, but we were sent back to Hawaii again for more training. We boarded ship, and I can't remember exactly when it was. It was in February. Oh, there was one other island, Vella La Vella, that we had a little action. Didn't amount to much, but that was one of the islands where there was combat and we were involved in it. Didn't engage with the enemy at all on Vella La Vella, but we were there and it was a skirmish. Then back at Hawaii, the big island, we trained and trained and trained. And finally, about the, probably the second week of February 1945, we boarded ship, not knowing where we were going or what we were going to do. But we were at sea for probably 3 or 4 days. And they called us all together and said, we are going to invade Iwo Jima. Now Iwo Jima was Japanese soil. They had controlled, it was their country, you know, an island away from the main string of islands of the Japanese Empire, but still part of their empire. And they had occupied that island for military purposes for years and years. They were well dug in, they were well fortified. We, on the 19th of February, 1945, we were transported to a point off the east coast of Iwo Jima. There we went down rope ladders into LCIs and started toward the island. The H hour, that was the 19th, H hour was 0900. And my group, our battalion was in the first wave. 9 o'clock, we were to hit that island. At almost exactly 9 o'clock, our LCI came to a stop on the sand, and the front end of that LCI opened up, and we walked off into the water and toward that black sand of Iwo Jima. As we were wading through the water, a Corsair, a Corsair, which was one of the better planes the United States had, which had been strafing and harassing the Japanese emplacements, crashed right in front of us in the water. And it occurred to me, you know, that this is war. This is real. That man died, that pilot. And within, oh gosh, just a few minutes, there were hundreds of men dead on that beach. For the Japanese had fortified, and they obviously knew we were coming because it was daylight, and they had seen our ships, and, you know, they were waiting. And that initial landing took a beating. Our landing was just at the foot of Mount Suribachi. The 26th Marines were to take Mount Suribachi. The 27th Marines, which was the outfit I was in, were to cross the island, the narrow part, and then head north to secure, actually they were after the airports that were on Iwo Jima. The Air Force. The Air Force had lost ships, lost planes, because they couldn't get to Japan and back, and especially those that were damaged without a place to land. And that was a major thrust of Iwo Jima, to get those airports so that damaged planes or planes that were light on fuel had a place to set down. Well, Iwo Jima was, it was a terrible, terrible battle. There were 6,500 Marines died, and around 21,000 Japanese that died.